today to have John Lane, wonderful writer, probably one of the most important ecological writers, particularly of the southern environment, going today. And he's been doing it for years and years, for decades, probably 3 decades now, and still looks incredibly young.
I'm feeling young, as I did.
But he's an adventurer, and he's a native son of South Carolina, so we're thrilled to have him here today with us. I'll embarrass him a little bit with an intro because he deserves it. But he's written more than a dozen books, and every time I see him, he's added another one. He's snuck another one in because he just keeps going and going. He's multi-genre. He writes nonfiction, fiction, poetry, you name it, he can do it. I think maybe he'll write a play next time.
I've got one.
See, I don't even know about it, but he does a little bit of everything. He does it well. He is one of the most important contemporary writers of our southern ecology. And it puts him in the visionary company of environmental writers like Wendell Berry, Franklin Burroughs, just up the road here, and Janice Ray. He's a native of upstate South Carolina, Spartanburg to be exact. That's where I come from. In fact, we graduated from Spartanburg High School, same high school, so we're proud recipients of a South Carolina public school education, for better and worse. Our life of education didn't hurt us too bad, as Paul Simon said. But many of his work exploit his adventures out exploring South Carolina. So he doesn't just sit back and write about it, he gets out in it. He is very much an adventurer, an adventure writer here in South Carolina. And just to embarrass him with just a few honors, because he's got so many, but we'll narrow the list because we'd be here a long time. John served as founding director of the Goodall Environmental Studies Center and professor of English at Wofford College. In 2001, he won the Philip Reed Memorial Award for Outstanding Writer on the Southern Environment. In 2014, he was inducted into the South Carolina Academy of Authors, and he was instrumental in creating, with his spouse, Betsy Teeter, it's right here on the second row next to Libby, the thriving Hub City Writers Project, which has now published more than 400 authors. So it's a great Hub City Writers Project, which is a press and a bookstore up in Spartanburg. And in fact, Spartanburg named the street next to Hub City Bookshop Teeter Lane in honor of the couple. So you can go visit Teeter Lane and see it, and you should if you're ever in the Spartanburg area. Go see Hub City Books, and it's a great little shop and bookstore. And people who love books should definitely be there. It's revitalized downtown Spartanburg. One of his most recent books, Neighborhood Hawks, is what we're going to talk about today mostly. And I have to say, one of his most recent books, because he already published another book in between writing this thing with Phil Wilkinson, one of our local heroes, wildlife biologist, sitting right next to his spouse, Libby Burgundy. And we'll talk a little bit about that. 7 Days on the Santee Delta. But Neighborhood Hawks, John spent a year closely tracking a pair of red-shouldered hawks in his backyard, essentially. It's a big backyard, but up in Spartanburg. And so this is all about the amazing things that revealed to him, and how suburbia and wildness collide, but also coexist and coalesce. But it's amazing books. It's a little bit bird watching, it's a little bit nature writing, memoir, and some poetry thrown in. But the core concern, I think, throughout his work, how the non-human world converges with and sometimes comes in collision with the human realm. And ultimately, John asks us, why do our hearts go out so fully to these wild creatures? So with all that, sorry, that was a very wordy introduction. I'll try to shut up a little more and let John talk. You've been a hard worker, John. This didn't come easily. You got 12 books, and I know we got some folks who are writers on their own out there. You're a hard-working man. You're like you had to work your way up. How did you get into writing and publishing?
Thanks, Dan. Thanks for having me here, and thanks to everybody for coming out. I love this place. I was here. It could have been a poetry reading that Libby set up a few years ago, and had a great time there. And I'm really excited to be here. So for me, it's never been a struggle, I think, because I write not effortlessly, but fluidly, and I love to write. And one of the things that's different about me and many of my colleagues is it always gets under my skin, and I hear it all the time. I hate to write. I write, and I've won the Pulitzer Prize, but I hate to write. Writing is hard. Writing is difficult, and I hate it. But when I get it finished, I'm happy, and I've never been like that. I've always found it easy to write. Now, writing well is a different thing, but I always get up in the morning, and I keep a journal. I've been keeping a journal for 40 years, and so every morning, almost, I just write. I write lots of letters and emails. Even today, when emails are, I know that you can't say okay, but even now, but when emails are just okay or yes, I still write page-and-a-half emails. Dan can attest to that. And so I've always written, I've always enjoyed writing. What I've struggled with is teaching myself to revise, and I'm a deep reviser. I revise and revise and revise because my first drafts generally aren't that good. And so what comes of my books comes from work. But I enjoy that work even. I've got an essay I'm working on now that is about a trip that Betsy and I took to Arkansas in October. And on that trip, we just decided, I know it sounds weird, but we'd never been to Arkansas, so we decided to go and spend 3 weeks driving around Arkansas. And we went and hiked and paddled and biked all over the state. And while I was on that trip, I kept a journal, and I got this hint in that journal. There's an essay here. And it came because I really have admired a poet for many, many decades named Frank Stanford, who died in the 70s as a 29-year-old in Arkansas, killed himself, and he's become a really fairly famous poet among contemporary poets. And I've always loved him. And so I started working on this essay called Arkansas Seance, because I kept getting these hints of Frank Stanford in my journal. And so when I got back, I took those little hints in my journal and I made a first draft. I went, oh, that's not very good. And now it's December, and I've written probably 8 drafts of this essay, and I'm finally beginning to see it. It's there. I had a line yesterday that I love. It's, rivers never commit suicide. And I don't know where that's going and what I'm going to do with that, but that's part of whatever this essay is about. And so I've written forever. It's hard, but I love the hard work, kind of like, just love it, and I can't imagine stopping.
It's you just keep going, and I know for some people it is just staring at the blank page or the blank screen.
Most writers hate it.
It's tough. Most people really do, but that's not your issue, and and some of it is the practice, emails, letters, all that. It's writing.
It's all writing.
So that's some advice that not everybody gives, and then the tough part though is revising and getting it, shaping it. But that's, you kind of get it on the other end. But that's interesting to hear out there. And what inspires you to keep writing? Is there? I mean, you could stop. You've got plenty of books, and they are for sale back there, incidentally, in the back. So, some of them, not all, but. Why do you, I mean, you could quit professionally, certainly, but what does inspire you to keep going?
I think I just keep going because it's the thing that I've that I do in my life that I feel most confident about. I mean, all the other things that I feel I'm okay at. I was a pretty good tennis player, but I wasn't a great tennis player. I was a pretty good basketball player, wasn't a great basketball player. But I feel like when I write, I'm doing something that I really can do, and I've been rewarded by these books and publications. People saying, "Yes, you're pretty good at this. Keep going." And when I get up in the morning, I mean, it's always the first thing I'm thinking about. When I read, it's always what I'm reading toward. I'm a broad reader, a voracious reader, but I'm not a pleasure reader. I don't read novels because I drop into that dream state everybody talks about and disappear into a good story. I'm always sitting there well, I brought my copy of Peregrine with me, and if you want to, I'll put it back there on the table, and you can see just how obsessed I am with underlining and highlighting and writing in the margins. I'm always having this conversation with myself about what I'm reading, and I think it's because I'm always wondering, well, what can I steal? What can I borrow? What can I beg from this author that will make me a better writer? Like from J.A. Baker, who wrote the Peregrine, I learned, highlight every verb in your book and try to come up with a better one. You know, and I've always done something like that, but I mean, from J.A. Baker, the verbs, and Dan will tell you, this is the book I read before I started Neighborhood Hawks. And J.A. Baker is a fabulous pop, his verbs pop. Yeah. And they surprise you. You go, oh, that's a weird verb. And so I always go, bark it out and go, here's 4 or 5 other verbs I could put here to make this sentence a little more interesting. So I write because I have to.
And that's not uncommon to hear from writers. It's kind of maybe an obsession that you follow or you honor, let's say, that there's something that drives you. And you do it, and you do it well, but you're always, another thing, always be writing is one piece of advice, always be reading.
Yeah.
You know, and you're absorbing that, and I think you're maybe preaching to the choir out here. It's a
library.
We got a lot of
there are a lot of readers.
Yeah. So, but always be reading, and that's, a lot of creative writers, that's almost, all of them, that's their advice. You got to read, and pick up. It might be useful. You're absorbing that, and either on a less conscious level or even on a very conscious level, picking it up. And you are something of a literary journeyman. I think we could call you in that you do so many different arts, different genres. Mm-hmm. But you also, you travel around,
yes.
And that's...
Yeah, one of the, and it may be a way to segue into this book, one of the structures that worked for me from the very beginning as a writer, my very first book of poems, from my very first book of poems all the way to my first book of prose, was it was made up mostly of what I've come to call excursion narratives. I go somewhere and I write about whatever time I'm in. Like, as an example, this book that just came out, 7 Days on the Santee Delta. I knew Phil, we were good friends, and I knew of his work with alligators in the Santee Delta, and I was very interested in the Santee Delta because I'd written about it in other places. But I said, how am I going to get a book out of this if I decide to do a book? Well, I'm just going to go to Georgetown and go out in the field with Phil Wilkinson and write down whatever he's doing. And I actually wanted to call this book Field Days, as in field days. And thank goodness we got good editors at each of those books who said, no, we come up with a better title than that. But this idea of the excursion narrative, and I have trouble teaching it to my students because for some reason it doesn't seize people the way it seizes me. I go somewhere, I write down what happens, and then I go home and I take notes, and then I dump that day or that excursion in prose on a computer just as fast as I can, and I write down everything I can remember or everything I took notes about what happened. And then that becomes my through line for a book or an essay in either first person present or first person past. And I could have a long argument that only Dan would be interested in here about tense in nonfiction books. But either first person present or first person past. In other words, either I did this, I went with Phil, I am with Phil, we are walking through the Santee Delta, or I went with Phil to the Santee Delta and we walked through blah, blah, blah. So there's that line in a piece, but then off of that line with the revision comes the research. How do I learn more about the landscape I was in? How do I add, I call them layers, how do I layer that landscape with two types of history that are interesting to me, human history and natural history. I happen to be more interested in natural history than human history. That's my weird thing. You know, somebody like the person who wrote the Santee River book in the 1960s, Henry Savage, wrote an entire book about the Santee River, and he never went on it in a canoe that I know about, because it's nowhere in his book, and he didn't talk much about the animals. But I layer every narrative I write with human history and natural history, but holding it all together is that through line, I'll call it, of the excursion. I've got to go somewhere and do something. Sometimes it's a tiny little circle, like Neighborhood Hawks is around the house, around the neighborhood. Sometimes it's Suriname in South America. Sometimes it's England. I've got an essay I wrote about a trip we made in England. Sometimes it's Arkansas. But it's always me, like Henry David Thoreau. What's more interesting to talk about than me? But there's always an I. I have an exercise with my students that's worked really well, where I'll give them the beginnings of 8 or 10 different essays, just one page, and I ask them to highlight where I first appears in the essay, and then to think about what it actually does to your consciousness when you're reading an essay. And like Walden, I is the first word. He puts himself up there right away, whereas you read some essayists and it'll be 6 or 7 pages into the essay before the first I. Now what does that do to you as an observer and to your consciousness and to that narrative where that I appears? So for me, structure is more important than style. I want to get that structure right, and for whatever reason, that excursion narrative has become my go-to structure. Like a good 40, you know.
Yeah, and that's, you've done that Neighborhood Hawks, you did it Circling Home, where you did was the half?
I put a plate on a topo map and I situated it. I had a month off from teaching. I didn't know what I was going to do, and I wasn't going to watch television. So I took this plate and I put it on a topo map of the area around our house. And I figured out where the house was in the center of the plate, although I couldn't see through it. And then I took a Sharpie and I drew a circle, and I picked up the plate and I said, I'm going to spend 1 month intensely exploring this circle. And I'm going to write about everything I can find with that layering again, and with me being able to go and get on my bicycle, drive, walk, paddle, everything that I could do in that single circle around my house. And then my paddle to sea, I get in a canoe and I paddle to the ocean from Spartanburg. The Chattooga, I go to the top of the Chattooga watershed, and I go to the bottom of the watershed, because there's only 2 ways to write a river narrative. You can go upstream or downstream. You can either Huck Finn it or Joseph Conrad it. That's all you can do. You either go up or you go down. And I would rather go down, because it's more fun to go down the river than up the river. Although Conrad might argue with me, you know. And then what else am I missing? Oh, Coyote Settles the South. We hear coyotes outside our house. 7 years ago in Spartanburg, South Carolina, I go, book, 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 book. Because hardly at that time, hardly anybody was concerned about coyotes in the South. They were already here, but they weren't making the splash they're making now. And I decided I was going to drive all over the South and talk to coyote lovers and coyote haters and try to write a narrative out of this animal, this predator settling the Southeast. And I chose that as a good example of that word thing. Yeah. I could have said Coyote invades the South. I could have, which most of the Coyote haters feel, oh my God, they've invaded our territory. I could have said Coyote sneaks into the South, but I used that Coyote settles the South because my 3 thesis points in that book are they're here, they're not going away, and we've got to learn to live with them. They know how to live with us. And I would argue if you're naive enough to think all that means is kill them, oh boy, you got a big surprise coming 100 years from now, because they tried that in the West and it didn't work. So why should we believe it's going to work in the South? You know, so another excursion, but this one went in these various directions. I probably missed 1 or 2.
Oh, yeah, I know. Yeah, it's tough to keep up. And let's talk about Neighborhood Hawks. And this is, it's I think an amazing book. And again, that's one where you're centered in place, but it's an adventure. And you kind of watch the hawks moving around.
It's the same circle as Circling Home.
Yeah, sort of that circling movement at these red-shouldered hawks, a pair of them, and it was inspired by,
I'm going to pass this around.
Yeah.
This is a photograph by a friend of mine in Spartanburg taken outside his deck, on his deck, of a red-shouldered hawk. And
it's inspired, you mentioned, by this book, which is a wonderful book if you haven't read it, J. Baker's Peregrine. When he did the same thing, following around falcon in Essex, on the Essex coast, and that was
the 60s.
Late 60s.
It came out in 67 and then disappeared. He followed peregrine falcons for 10 years and then wrote a book about it, an almanac, where he has an introduction and then he drops into an almanac of following those birds. But rather than 10 years, which would have been a long book, he condenses that 10 years, as Thoreau did. The literary scholar can tell us about this, but Thoreau condensed 2 years into 1 year with Walden, and J. Baker condenses 10 years into 1 year with the Peregrine. And then right after, a few years after the Peregrine came out, he died, and the book went out of print. And then it only sold a couple thousand copies in England at that point, and people knew it was good, but it was not a hit. And so then he died, it went out of print, and then in 2006, New York Review of Books brought it back into print in this edition, and it's sold since then tens of thousands of copies. There's just something about this book that connected with people's imaginations, and it connected with mine. I picked it up, and I started reading it, and I was like, oh, this is so good, and I threw it down. I couldn't read it anymore, and it took me 6 months to finish it because it's so good, and even highlighting and stuff. And so then at the end of it, I realized, oh man, I've got red-shouldered hawks in my neighborhood, and there hasn't been an American version of this. I'm not interested in watching them for 10 years, even though I've already watched them for 15 casually. They've nested in our front yard. They're non-migrating birds, so they're always there. They're very noisy. I heard one when we got out of the car today, here at the library. Every place I go to talk about this book, I almost always hear one of these birds. Now, it's one that says more about their ubiquity than it does about some sort of EBG.
They're following you.
Yeah, they're not following me. They're everywhere. They're everywhere. So, but anyway, I said I can do this, but I want to do something different, and I don't know. I hope somebody writes about this someday and helps me understand it. But I decided right away I don't want to take 2 or 3 years worth of observations and make them a literary year. I want to take whatever happens in this actual year and make a narrative out of it. And there were moments when Betsy said to me, I believe you're going to have to go 2 years here because there just isn't enough happening. You haven't found the nest, you haven't done this, you haven't done that. And I said, no, I'm going to stick with my structure, which is I'm going to actually write exactly what happened in a year. And I did that, I finished the year, and I ended up extending it by a month because something did happen outside that year that I had to write about that ends the book. But Baker is the reason I wrote this book. J.A. Baker is why I wrote Neighborhood Hawks. Now it's dangerous. I did this with the Chattooga book. I decided to follow James Dickey down the Chattooga River, and James Dickey's quite a personality. I mean, his literary presence. And was it Flannery O'Connor who said never get on the tracks when the William Faulkner Express is coming through? There are writers that you don't want to be on the tracks when they're coming through. And several of the reviewers of the Chattooga book said, you know, it's great that Dickey's in there, but this book stands on its own. It would be a good book without Dickey, but I'm glad Dickey's in there. And I worried about J.A. Baker, and Dan knows that I wrote an entire draft of this book where I left J.A. Baker out. But I was encouraged by readers of that early draft to go back and put him back in, but to do it just a little bit of Baker here and there. Don't give the book over to Baker, because it's your book, and he's a powerful writer. So I used him just as a way to talk about my own American birds, you know, living in my front yard in 2018, 17, whenever it was.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it really does stand on its own. And the Baker's book is a powerful book. And it is a violent book, a lot of kills.
I was sick of death by the end of this book. And I know death's a big part of life, but I just went, do you really need to tell me about all 238 of the kills by the peregrine falcon and describe them in great detail? If you know anything about peregrines, they'll rip the chest out of every bird they kill, so the birds are kind of just flop there with half their body missing, you know. The red-shouldered hawks eat small reptiles and amphibians and small mammals. That's all, and earthworms. I observed them a couple of times eating, foraging for earthworms on really cold winter days. But they don't kill. They will kill a bird, but they don't usually kill birds. If you got a bird killer at your house, it's probably a Cooper's hawk or a sharp-shinned hawk.
And there is I think there is some death in Neighborhood Hawks. You don't
not only with the hawks. Yes.
Yeah, and there's a scene. How cute you say there's a line. How cute a fawn out grazing, for example, and then you fill in the rest of that story.
Yeah, it's probably going to become a good nugget for a coyote. Obviously this fawn's either the doe's been killed and hit by a car or something. It's obviously a fawn because I see it there and it doesn't go away, and I think this is an easy target for the coyotes that are in our neighborhood.
Yeah. And you hear later you record the coyotes, the noise, the yapping coming out and the howling. So that nature's there, but there's something different, and you quote the poet, wonderful poet Robinson Jeffers, "Give your heart to the hawks." Could you say more about how that sort of gets spread?
Well, I originally, my original, you can tell I must not be good with the publishers with my titles, but I wanted to call this book "Heart to the Hawks." And all my literary friends said, "Great title, that's a great one, stick with that one." UGA Press, when I sent it down there, said, "We don't like this title. Nobody's going to know what you mean by this, and they're going to be confused by it." And so my second title was Neighborhood Hawks, which I think is a good title, a more general title. But Betsy asked me early on in this process when I was keeping these notes for this book of this almanac. She said to me one day, sitting on the porch, "Why is it that your heart goes out to all these wild things?" And I couldn't answer her. I didn't know the answer to that question. And I'm not sure. I think in here a couple places I try to answer it, but I never entirely get there. But I do know that my heart literally goes out to every roadkill. And I counted 7 dead raptors between Spartanburg and here on the side of the road. That might not sound like a lot in 220 miles, but when you notice every one of them, it is a lot. And I would say, there's an example of why is it that I just can't drive and not notice what's dead on the side of the road. And it's not just some statistical weirdness that I want to count and divide by the number of miles or whatever, but I've never passed a dead animal on the side of the road. Betsy can attest to this, that I did not notice. There may have been some I missed, but I see what every angle the deer is in after it's been hit. I noticed the owls and the hawks. I noticed the possums. I noticed the fewer dead dogs you see than you would have 20 years ago. That's a good, that's an improvement on our highways. My heart, for some reason, I've got this empathy for wildlife. E.O. Wilson, I think, calls it, Phil, do you remember what E.O. Wilson calls the philia that,
biophilia.
Biophilia, yeah. E.O. Wilson calls it biophilia. I have a deep case of biophilia. It might be interesting to read, I'm going to read you I'm not going to let you know what happens in the last section that made me spin this book, but I'm going to read about 4 paragraphs here from the after section. It's the one I thought the book was going to end with these hawks fledging in the front yard and me seeing them, but it didn't. Okay, after, this is about 4 paragraphs. After, give your heart to the hawks, Robinson Jeffers. Late September, it's a little cooler now, not muggy like August. I sit and listen to the yard, a familiar soundtrack that I have not abandoned. No hawks cry though. Every time I heard the hawks, I went out and found them. I made that promise to myself that I would not hear them unless I went outside and looked for them. No hawks cry though. The juveniles, have moved further and further away from the nest tree now, and I have released them in what seems a healthy cross-species uncoupling. I have almost forgotten what these hawks demanded of me day after day for a year. If our relationship was indeed commensal, then I think I got the better end of the narrative deal. The hawks still exist beyond themselves as characters in the stories I tell about the year. I'll never know if I ever was in theirs. When was the last time I checked in with them? They've been off stage for a month now. Without their calling, there's a feeling of freedom in the landscape, and it extends into my own head. Or is it the other way around? I think now that the daily form of the almanac provided cover from coming to terms with some of the serious issues of bird-human cohabitation. How close could I really get to these birds? Stay with it, stay engaged for 1 year, and it's easy to believe something has to happen. There's a payoff at the end. Anything shaped like a circle, like a year, creates meaning. But after the year concluded, I thought I could just let go. I thought I had no more responsibility after late June beyond being a human being, and that the hawks had no more purpose than beyond being hawks. They could recede from my human awareness and take their place again as citizens of a much, much larger, more than human world. They could become almost invisible in the woods again. We could settle together back into our natural niches, human and bird, domestic and wild, dreaming wild, and being wild. There could be space between our animal lives to navigate. Other places, projects, and relationships could go on. I could go back to looking at the river as a thing that flows, rather than watching the river for a hawk flying over the thing that flows. Right now, though, it feels a little like a breakup. I'm sad when I don't see them on the street every day. I feel guilty not following them when I do see them. When they are absent, I feel nostalgic for the 4 preceding seasons, those long, spiraling months of hawk-centeredness within which I was caught so deeply. I didn't anticipate this lingering bird crush. Do you know the old song, Walk Away Renee? That's how I feel. That popular song assures me that every serious relationship leaves a little residue that never goes away.
And you talk about that Hawk-centeredness and trying to approach that world. You have incredible empathy for it, but you're not suggesting that we can actually merge with,
I
that's like a
resisted
James
that.
Dickey
Yeah,
thing.
James Dickey had this thing, a critic, one of the critics we know, in a literary book called it The Urge to Merge. I mean, he really wanted to become a wild animal. If you read The Last Wolverine, or you read that incredible poem about them catching the shark off Shark Parlor,
yeah.
or you read Heaven of Animals, you realize, oh my God, maybe it's the alcohol. Who knows? But James Dickey wanted to be an animal. He wanted to be an animal, and I've always stayed right outside that threshold. I'm not sure about Phil Wilkinson. I think Phil Wilkinson would maybe merge with those alligators if you gave him a chance. But I've stayed slightly outside that threshold because I think it's really interesting to question, what do we share and what do we not share with this, more what I call, and it's David Abrams' phrase, it's not mine, but the more, and I had a Baptist preacher really jump me once for this phrase, the more than human world. The more than human world. And I really do believe that. I really do believe the world is a lot bigger than human beings and our consciousness. But I like also knowing that I am special in my own way and that I can stay outside and I don't have to merge with that wildness. Yeah.
And you talk about a secret world of animals and of the hawks as well, that they almost that hawks have a kind of consciousness of their own, even memory and imagination.
Yes. Well, it's becoming, one of the things that's happened in the last 15 years is we have had researcher after researcher who has shown that we have underestimated animals over and over and over. And that animals, besides human animals have consciousness that we would never have given them before. Everybody knows the story of the crow, the Caledonian crow solving the problem, that there's 5 steps to the problem to get to the reward, and they do it like that. They just, and language has fallen away. It used to be that when I was in college as a freshman and you were in a sociology class, or a biology class, you would list the 4 things that we have that animals don't have. And one of them is language, and we know now that that's not true. And there's the idea of our distance from the animal world has completely fallen away. We may hang on to it for philosophical or theological terms, and that is understandable. But we cannot hang on to it for biological terms. Can I get an amen from the biologist? We cannot hang on to that. It's gone. It's gone. And like the coyote work that I did in my book, the question you have to ask is, once it's gone, why am I hanging on to it? And why can't I come closer to understanding the complexity of the animal world, and with us in it, is we know that. One of my mentors and best friends was John Pilley, and he's the psychologist who taught the Border Collie 1,100 words. And that went a long way toward dropping some of these ideas we have about dogs are machines. Dogs are closer to us than we think. And coyotes are dogs.
I've got 3 dogs at home, and believe me, they're treated much better than I am.
Yeah.
Everyone else certainly believes that. And so, knowing that, how does that, I guess, on a broader scale, as a South Carolinian, and most of us are living in South Carolina, how does that kind of change our approach to the environment in this state?
It changes it dramatically if you accept it, because we have a wild state Hub City published a book called Wild South Carolina, and it's a description of the ways that you can go to these, how many natural areas, Betsy? 35 natural areas in this state where you can go and you can get into contact with this that I'm talking about. You just bring to it your own openness, and it's there. And I mean, you can get in contact with it in New York City. It's possible. When I go to New York, I always go directly and commune with pale male, the red-shouldered hawk, red-tailed hawk that used to nest on Mary Tyler Moore's balcony, you know. And it's living a good life in New York City, in Central Park, eating pigeons and rats. So you can get in touch with it in New York. In South Carolina, it's in your face here if you walk out, almost if you walk out your back door everywhere. And that's hopeful to me, in spite of the war against wild places that's underway now. I'm still hopeful about it. We're going to lose a lot. I mean, I'm not hopeful for elephants and rhinos in this world we live in now, but I'm hopeful for alligators. I'm hopeful for coyotes. I'm hopeful for there's a lot of species that are going to make it in this warming human world. There are a lot that are going to be lost. I do believe we're in the middle of a great extinction, but there's a lot of stuff that's going to make it through. I don't know about us. We can ask you what you think. Yes?
Why were so many raptors dead on the side of the road? What was killing them?
Cars. What they do is they land in the verges, and they'll go after and we don't know how many landed and made it up. But they land in those verges because they're perfect for mice and small mammals, and they'll catch a mouse or miss a mouse. And then they just take the wrong angle of ascent, and they take off. Phil, would you say that's probably it? They're just unlucky. But this time I counted 7, and that was a lot.
Seems like an awful lot.
I don't know whether it's winter or whether, I don't know what it was. One time I drove down, I remember telling Phil and Libby, and I counted over a dozen dead coyotes between Spartanburg and here. And this time I only counted, we saw 1 dead coyote. And everybody knows there's probably, I'm just guessing at this, there's probably 300 or 400 coyotes moving around the state right now. So they're learning how to negotiate highways and things. But there'll be times, maybe it has something to do with they're moving a lot or whatever, but there'll be times when they're more. I counted 22 dead deer driving from Spartanburg to Athens the other day. And then I tried to be a scientist and figured that the deer density along an interstate is probably maybe 40, 50 deer per square mile. And there were 22 dead deer between Athens and Spartanburg, and that's so many miles. And so actually when I did it that way, it didn't sound like that many deer I hit crossing that interstate, because there were a lot of deer out there. You know, we know there's that many deer per square mile in the state. Some places it's up to 100 a square mile, I think, the density. Think about a square mile. Not that big. Yeah.
John, will
Yeah.
you read, we'll open up for questions
Yeah.
in just a minute. Would you like to read, I was going to say
Yeah.
the rattlesnake.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna read them. I want to show y'all at this point the book and talk about it just a second. I just got a poem in this book. It's called A Literary Field Guide to Southern Appalachia. And what they did is they got a naturalist to write a naturalist description of a species, plants, reptiles, mammals, amphibians, and fish. And they sent the list out to a bunch of poets and said, choose an animal and write a poem about the animal. And I was a little late in the process. I must have been second team or something, because most of the animals had been taken by the time I got the list. But the timber rattlesnake was still left on the list, and I'm a lover of reptiles. And I love rattlesnakes. I always have. One of my best friends, our best friends, is a guy named Ab Abercrombie who's doing a big Eastern Diamondback rattlesnake study up in Francis Marion, where he's put receivers in rattlesnakes and he follows them around. But anyway, so I got the timber rattlesnake, and I wanted to read, and it sort of speaks to some of the same feelings that I have, kind of this more than human world, and how important are humans, and how we should love all species, because I know that a lot of people in the room going, rattlesnake. I just know that's very human, you know. It's called Crotalus horridus, which is the genus and species name, the horrible rattlesnake, the horrible bell rattler. And this is the rattlesnake that's in the upper part of South Carolina. The canebrake is the similar one down here. This is the timber rattlesnake. When I need relief from being only human, I meander upslope, scout the stone lookout tower, edged with brittle morning sun, and conjure a rattler's bright coils. It's an old presence I feel there with every step into laurel slicks or onto vague trail verges. On the mountain, the ground itself is shot through with native venom. Rattlesnake plantain grows too thin to hide sunning buzzworms. It takes Galax for that, especially along the ledge trail, where they sometimes den with copperheads. Darkness runs deep in those forgotten shadow caves. Old-timers say the devil himself twisted slumbering pairs of black-tailed timbers to forge the gates of hell. In their presence, I seek salvation, a blessing. I look behind rotting hemlock logs, stepped across not out of fear, but knowledge. One might linger there in supplication and, once sighted, anoint me with its sizzling wildness.
Yeah.
Sizzling wildness.
Sizzling wildness, which most of us, I think, try to avoid.
Scares the crap out of me.
Yeah, at all costs, but John seeks it
I've
out.
been seeking it for 35 years. I mean, when I was in college, my best friend now is a very prominent herpetologist who studies salamanders, but he would come to my room every Friday afternoon, just about in the spring, and he would say, God, this was back in 1970, got a 6-pack of beer, let's go up on Highway 11 and ride the road and look for rattlesnakes. And we'd get in his truck and we'd drive to Highway 11 and we would ride back and forth until nightfall, or after nightfall, actually looking for snakes on the road. And anytime we found one on the road, we'd stop and get it off the road and take photographs of it and head it on its way. And that was my Friday night in college.
Well, and you notice too the descriptiveness, that's another thing you get from, just about all of these books. You get John knows the flora and fauna of his native terrain intimately as well. So you get kind of a course in natural in botany and biology as well as you're reading this. But he does it in a very artful way, and the attentiveness as well. There's almost like he says in Neighborhood Hawks, by attention I mean deep daily listening from dawn to dusk. So he's listening for those hawks all the time. There's almost like a Zen-like quality too, and that's, there's a practice to it. So
I really miss it. I really miss the attention I paid to those hawks for a year. I mean, Betsy swears they're not around now, that they came, just that they're there. We know they're there, but we don't hear them the way we did that year. We also had 250 vultures show up that year to roost less than a quarter mile from our house. And now they're gone. They didn't come back. So they got the word. John Lane is writing a book. Let's show up in the neighborhood. Yes.
Could you mimic the sound of hawk?
I'm not very good at it. Kiyer, 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 kiyer. We need Drew Lanham here to do it. But it's usually 3 calls. It's often a call. That and the red-tailed hawk are the 2 calls that they'll splice into films for eagles. Eagles are not exciting at all the way they sound, so they actually put in a hawk sound for the eagle. Afterwards, if you want to, I'll pull up my iBird Pro and play a couple sounds for you off of that.
Nice.
If you hear it though, and you get used to it, you'll hear it everywhere. Other questions? Yes, sir.
Speaking of sounds, any observations about crows mobbing up and?
Yeah, the crows are all through the book. They're always accompanying the hawks. Sometimes they mob them. Sometimes they're just there. But I had a lot of fun watching the interactions between hawks and crows in the yard. And I actually had one of the wildest things that happened. One of the great plot points that showed up unexpectedly was I was sitting, I think it was maybe February, I was sitting on our little screen porch looking down into the floodplain, and a raven showed up in Spartanburg. And I went, that is a huge crow. And I started watching, and it was there for about 3 or 4 days, and I actually saw it chasing a black racer. There was a brush pile down there, and it would stand and watch that brush pile, and that black racer came out, and that raven took off after it, didn't catch it. But I don't know whether the raven, knew that brush piles were the place to go to look for snakes or whatever. But that raven was a huge surprise when it showed up. And then I did a little research and found out that there was a nesting pair of ravens. There's a nesting pair that shows up often up up on the mountain front, only about 30 miles from our house up at Caesar's Head. So they do move through the area. Do y'all have ravens down here? Yeah. Yes?
What is the geography that you say that the hawk will stay in one area?
Yeah.
How wide an area?
Yeah, their territory is about a square mile. And one of the things, we live on a ridge, on the side of a floodplain. The floodplain's right below us, maybe 40 feet below us. And then the creek's 100 yards behind our house, Big Creek. The creek I actually put in to paddle the ocean. And one of the, it's not always true, but one of the rules of thumbs with red-shouldered hawks and red-tailed hawks, the red-shouldered hawks are smaller generally, but they're almost always along a waterway. I have a line in here in the introduction. I say I found common ground and purpose with these river rats of the hawk clan, birds like me with a strong preference for nearby watery realms. So red-shouldered hawks are often always associated with water, close to water, floodplains, swamps. Red-tailed hawks you see usually on the ridge tops, and they're the squirrel eaters. They're the ones you want around if you don't want your squirrels, because they can take some squirrels out. So if you've got a hawk in your front yard and you live on a ridge top, there's more water down here, so it might be more complicated. But up there in the Piedmont, those ridge runners or ridge flyers are the red-shouldered hawk, red-tailed hawks, and then down in the water you get the red-shouldered.
Is there a hierarchy among territory of hawks?
That's a good question. I would think there is. It's interesting. There are a great many barred owls in our neighborhood, and barred owls and red-shouldered hawks share the same territories because the red-shouldered hawks are hunting during the day and the barred owls are hunting at night. And so I had one moment in here where I'm sitting in this swamp. Took my crazy creek. It was dry. It's been dry a couple months near our house, and I'm sitting there and I'm writing in my journal, and suddenly I look up and there's a red-shouldered hawk sitting 15 feet from me on a limb, and I look to my right and there's a barred owl sitting 15 feet from me on a limb, and they sat there the whole time that I was writing in my journal and never flew away. And among one thing I write about is red-shouldered hawks will get their nest robbed by owls often. I've got a video that I watched. I write about it here about seeing a great horned owl. This video is amazing. You see these two fledgling red-shouldered hawks in a nest, and then you see in the distance the way the camera, those nest cams they've got now, the camera's kind of positioned in such a way that in the distance you can see this bird coming and coming and coming, and then bop! Hits that nest and picks up one of those red-shouldered hawk fledglings and flies away. And the other red-shouldered hawk fledgling's like, what happened? Where's my brother? Where's my sister? And, I mean, it's gone. And they'll eat adults. They'll eat fledglings. So hierarchy, I'm not sure, but it's a dangerous life to live in some of these territories. Yeah.
And then just a comment,
Yeah.
it's not really a question. As I listened to you describe about taking a trip, a journey, whatever, and then coming back and writing, it just strikes me how, for many of us, that's how it all starts, because what did you do on your summer vacation?
Exactly. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. And I think I've kept a travel journal for 30 years, separate travel journal from my other journal, and it's so exciting to be able to go back and read about the details of the trip. Even if I didn't end up writing anything more about it, having it there in the journal was really, really important to me, especially since my memory's so bad.
Why specifically birds of prey?
I don't know. I've gone through this transition. I wrote about rivers and landscapes pretty extensively for the first 20 years of my prose life. I've got 3 or 4 books that rivers figure prominently in, and I put all my effort into sort of thinking out that world and writing about that world. And then, actually, part of it's selfish in that Dan will get a kick out of this. I went to a conference, an academic conference that I go to every 2 years, called the Association for Study of Literature and the Environment. This was about 5 or 6 years ago. I went to a bunch of sessions and listened to papers, and I wrote in my journal, I said, something shifted. Animals and food are really big right now out there in the academic world. And at that moment, that's when I started writing the Coyote book, and then the Hawk book, and then Phil and the alligators. Although I wrote about alligators the first time, and there's a piece in my first book of essays about my early work with an alligator biologist named Ab Abercrombie. And now I've got another book of essays called Animal Presences that I'm coming into Animal Presences is what I'm calling it right now. And it's a series of essays about interacting with animals. And so I sort of saw on the horizon that people were interested in animals. And obviously food. I mean, everybody's interested in food right now. And there's just book after book after book. There's food studies has become a huge thing in universities. And animal studies has become a huge thing in universities. And so partially the Raptors it was there. They were in my front yard. I'm not a scientist, but I can closely observe these animals and write about them in a popular press way that people like all of us would be interested in reading about. I don't think an ornithologist is going to read this book and learn a lot, someone who knows about birds and learn a lot they didn't know about red-shouldered hawks from this book. It's not a scientific paper, but I've been told already that people watching birds in their front yard and wondering what that hawk is that keeps dive bombing them on their walk because there's a nest nearby can learn a lot from this book. So I think it was just serendipity in some ways. Yeah. I don't know what the next, people are trying to get me to write about wild hogs. And I kind of am interested in that. There's not a personal narrative book out there about wild hog ravages the South. And there's a lot of interest right now. They're another one of those, unfortunately. They're here, they're not going away, and we've got to learn how to manage them. We're not going to get rid of the wild hogs in the South. Just like we're not going to get rid of kudzu or any of the other invasives that we have. Yeah, it's not going away. But that doesn't mean we don't need to stop fighting it, or that doesn't mean we don't need to stop shooting wild hogs. But it's not the management, it's not the full management of the species. And I'm really, that is the kind of question I'm really interested in, is these questions that aren't solved with easy answers. Because we as humans want easy answers. Wouldn't you agree? But there are none. Ab Abercrombie was quoting somebody, and he always said to me, there's a simple answer for every complex question, and it's always wrong. And if you use that as one of your dictums in life, you look at the world a lot differently, you know. And with wildlife, Phil, is that true, do you think? There are no easy answers to any wildlife question. Yeah. One more maybe, then we'll call it.
This is kind of an authored question.
Yeah.
How much interaction do you have with, say, Patrick McMillan at Clemson and Ron Rash up at Western Carolina?
Well, Ron Rash is a great friend of mine, and I see him every chance. We see him a lot when we do things, and Ron is not a communicator. Ron's emails are yep, no, maybe. He does not write long emails, or emails at all, or letters. He's always writing that next novel, is what Ron's doing.
Wonderfully booked.
Yes, he does. He's a great writer. And he's a good friend, and I really love Ron. Ron wrote me recently, he's got a book coming out with a big, long novella in it. It's a follow-up to I said Katrina, but that's how right. Serena. And we had an email exchange, the longest exchanges I've ever had with him. He said, I need to know that if an area was clear-cut in 1890, what are the top, the 15 birds I can say left the area probably because of the clear-cut. And so my friend Drew Lanham and I worked with that and sent Ron a list of these birds. I do not know Patrick McMillan. I've met him a couple of times. I can't believe that I'm in the world I'm in, and I've never had a conversation with Patrick McMillan, but I don't. I'd love to talk to him sometime. But Rudy Mankey was one of my great friends for years and years. The old Patrick McMillan I knew pretty well. And who was the third one? Ron, Patrick, and
Just those two.
those two, yeah. So writers keep up with each other, and I'm happy about that. That community is one of the most important things to me, and I enjoy and thrilled every time I get to see Ron and see his success and learn from him, because he's a fabulous fiction writer. Yes?
Yeah, we were at a Thanksgiving party in New Jersey last week, and somebody came up to me and said, "You're a wildlife biologist, come out here and identify this hawk." And there was a large hawk in a tree feeding on a squirrel. And he wasn't that far away, but my eyes aren't what they used to be. And I said, could be a Cooper's, but after listening to you, I believe it was a red tail.
Yeah, yeah. And I believe they'll take a squirrel when
Yeah,
they get a
I don't think
chance.
the Cooper's would.
Yeah, yeah.
I've seen them take squirrels.
Yeah, the red tail.
Yeah.
That's
Rabbits.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so it's not their preferred food. I think they'd rather take these smaller things, but they'll eat, they're very,
The red tail, definitely.
red tails for sure, oh yeah. I used to have a great office at Wofford when I was an English professor and not an environmental studies professor, and I was one of the few people with 2 windows in Old Main. I had a corner office, and there was a big oak tree, and one day I was sitting typing a letter, and a big red-tailed hawk that lives on the campus was sitting, and I was watching it, and then suddenly it dropped down one limb. It had been sitting there waiting for the squirrel to come out, and it dropped down one limb and hit that squirrel. And the squirrel struggled in such a way that the bird dropped. And the bird caught itself between 2 limbs like this with its wings, with that squirrel still struggling. And it would reach down about every 12 seconds and go, bam, 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 and hit that squirrel until it died, until the squirrel died. And then the bird pulled its wings and dropped, and then popped its wings out right before it hit the ground, and sat there on the ground right below that tree, eating that squirrel. And that was one of the most exciting moments of my Wofford teaching career. I saw another hand back there. Yes, sir.
In my yard, I stay friendly with the mockingbirds. They rule.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had red tails take squirrels out of the nest in the tree. I live on a pond.
Yeah.
I've seen the crows. They love going after the crows.
Yeah.
I've seen them going after osprey. I never saw them interact with a red tail. Are they smart enough to keep away from the red tail?
I bet they are. They're like, it's like Phil Wilkinson said to me. I asked a crazy question. I said, "How smart is an alligator?" As Phil Wilkinson said, "As smart as they need to be." And I would imagine every bird is as smart as it needs to be. Yeah.
Wish that were true of some of us. I'm sure that's true. of me.
I got a feeling we aren't as smart as we need to be about some things that has to do with the natural world and climate change, all that. Yeah.
That's for sure.
I would like to ask, when we're confronted almost daily with news stories about the environment, and yet there's people who think there's not any kind of crisis.
Right.
What do you think that is? I mean, every morning, this morning there were one about brain fever
Yeah.
and how they can't get to their food because of the warming
Yeah.
that creates ice, then they can't get through the ice.
Yeah. Well, I've got this kind of biological mind that's not trained, and I love deep time. I was trained as a geologist, a little bit of science that I was trained in. I'm always struggling with, I know there's a crisis. I know that this is a crisis, but I also know that this planet has undergone crisis after crisis after crisis for 4 billion years. And that's one of the things that I mentioned earlier. There are a lot of species that are going to make it through this crisis. And there are a lot that aren't. And the question is, how much can we do to stop, to settle the crisis? And the jury's out, even among the scientists I talk to about that. About how much we can actually. There's a lot we can do, but and then also I'm always keeping in the back of my mind the meeting I went to in 1982 in Asheville, North Carolina, with U.S. Fish and Wildlife and a whole bunch of biologists about the black bear in the Smokies. And in 1982, the consensus among the biologists was the black bear would be gone in 30 years, that it was not going to survive. And what's happened in that 30 years is they've actually flourished. And so I know that it's like a hurricane. I like it, and the scientists in the room can help me dismiss this. But to me, a lot of these questions, Ron, are like those spaghetti maps we always see when the hurricane's a month out, or 3 weeks out, or 2 weeks out, or even a week out. There's a lot of tracks this thing can take. And there are more probable tracks, and there are less probable tracks, but there are a lot of tracks. And every one of these crisis situations is more like a spaghetti map than it is a certainty track of this is what's going to happen. And my friend Terry Ferguson, the geologist, drives me crazy because his answer to every question I ever ask him is probably or maybe, or he's not going to say yes to anything. He always knows that there's an uncertainty. There's a certainty that we reach when we're in the middle of a hurricane. It's there, but that week out, there's a lot of probability to what's going to happen. And that still doesn't give me a lot of hope, but it gives me some hope that we're going to figure out how to turn some of these things around.
I think we'll close there, although that wasn't a very hopeful note. We will say, John, and I think his books.
I think it's mostly hopeful.
And most of his books give us a lot of hope, and they do. They really show what we have here. They show off, especially the ones centered in South Carolina, those great natural areas that we have. So you can read about them and then go experience them yourselves. And we have the books for sale in the back. So
I'll make my way back to that table. And I'll have this you can look through as well.
And thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
And we also have a list of books that Teresa and Pete further reading, so you can read about other books that John has produced. They put those together. Thanks.
Very nice.
They're wonderful. Thank you for doing that again. And thanks to John.